My half-lit face.
Let me grab that mic.
Joel Hoekstra.
I got eyes open wide and a back in my head, and every shake makes your silhouette. 'Cause I miss you, yeah, I miss you, I miss you. Oh.
Well, I grew up in a house with 2 classical musicians for parents, so there was always music going on, and they had me learning at a really young age, and I couldn't stand it. You know, I was like, ugh, why am I sitting here with a cello when I'm 3 years old, and I don't want to be doing this, and you know, piano when I was 7, and right about that age, I was like, I just want to play baseball. What's this music thing? This is totally lame. And oddly enough, then it was AC/DC, you know, hearing Back in Black and seeing Angus Young and being like, you remember the early days of MTV when they had like 3 videos that just played like all day? And one of them was AC/DC, and I was like, oh, now that's what I want to do. So when I went to my parents and asked for a guitar, they were supportive, and I'm sure had different visions of what that meant. But, you know, that's really what lit the fire. And I found a great teacher locally who did nothing but teach me songs for like a year. And that just, by then I was hooked. Yeah, so the way things kind of shook out for me is, you know, you practice really hard as a kid and you idolize a lot of the 80s bands and the 80s guitar players, particularly for me, and, you know, practice your ass off, and then you got these grand designs on, you know, go to Hollywood and go to GIT, right? I don't know how many people have heard of GIT, but that's Guitar Institute of Technology. And back then, that was like the guitar player version of, I'm going to take my band out to LA and get signed. You think, well, shit, I don't have a band, but I'm going to get myself out to Hollywood, and surely somebody will, you know, come along and discover me and help me out, and I'll land in this magical situation where everything rules. And, you know, it didn't really work out that way. I came out here right at the end of like that whole guitar scene where guitar players were getting signed to do instrumental albums, and I came out and Nirvana hit, you know, 91, 92. So it was an amazing thing actually to witness. And initially that's a, you know, very depressing thing, because you're watching the end of a scene that you grew up loving and that you were like immersed in a weird way, like in a fantasy way that you were gonna live out someday. And you know, then reality hits and you go, okay, that's not going to be the way it is. But I don't regret anything that happened during the downtime, the quote-unquote downtime of the 90s, of not being able to fall back on playing fast for a guitar solo or even play a guitar solo to be a good musician. I got a lot out of it, just out of learning to, you know, sing background vocals and be a pro at the level that you can make yourself valuable without quote-unquote shredding. Which is another very interesting thing, actually. You know, the term shredder back then, it didn't really come around until the 90s. There was no, you're a shredder coming out. It was actually a derogatory term when it started. Nowadays, people say shredder, like, oh, that guy's awesome, man, he can shred. But, you know, when people started to say that in the 90s, that was a derogatory thing. Like, you don't want him in your band, man, he's a shredder. Like, you're gonna want the guy who's gonna play 4 chords and not do anything fancy. I don't regret anything that became of, you know, my career during the 90s. It was really a great experience for me as a musician to learn to be a valuable asset to somebody's band, or to be a sideman to somebody. And I just kicked around and did anything I could. And one of the things I was doing was a show about Janis Joplin called Love Janis, a theater piece in New York that I ended up moving there for. And during the course of that, those were 60s musicians. I went, man, I got to get my hair long again. I had cut it short, and I grew my hair out, and all of a sudden, like right at that time, my hair got long, and the resurgence of a lot of these 80s bands was kicking in the mid-2000s. And I started playing with Jim Peterick, who's somebody from the band Survivor, and he had all his friends play every year, and I play in his world stage band, and that led to me getting an audition for Night Ranger. And those guys were heroes of mine as kids. You know, Brad Gillis and Jeff Watson were on my wall of favorite guitar players, literally in my room. So getting an opportunity to join that band and work with them for 7 years in Jeff's slot, as it turned out, was an honor for me, and really like just amazing. You know, a feeling of like, wow, I'm actually working with my heroes, you know, guys I grew up idolizing, and being able to, just to make a living, really, for me at that point was all it was about, and really still is in a lot of ways. That's what success is, I think, for a lot of musicians. And we don't have those same lofty goals of like, you know, let's drive 8 Ferraris in a mansion and do blow off the hooker's ass. You know, I think we're all just looking to pay our bills. Anyway, through working with Night Ranger and through my contacts in New York City, I also got the opportunity to be a part of the show Rock of Ages, which is an interesting take on the resurgence. I mean, it was like sort of a campy, comedic show. You know, the band, we didn't really look at it that way. I was like, hey man, 8 shows a week at home, great money, get to play with these talented musicians and play songs that I like, sign me up. You know, where do I sign? And the brilliant thing with that was it lined up perfectly with being in Night Ranger, or later for me, Trans-Siberian Orchestra in the winter, because I was able to take off whenever I wanted. It was a union-protected gig. So, you know, there was elements of that, the comedic thing with the actors and the actresses that was like, all right, they're sort of poking fun at like something I grew up loving, but at the same time, it was like, well, what do I care? I get to play music up here 8 shows a week that I like and get paid to do so. So it was really a fantastic thing for me in terms of a career, and essentially guaranteed that I had a gig every day for about 6.5 years. Well, it just was like a, you know, a 180 in terms of like the whole glam image of rock and roll, and that, and just the whole take on what it was to be a rock band, I think, just did like an about face. And that all happened really, I think, when the Smells Like Teen Spirit video came out. That was it. That was the turning point. I think there was a resurgence because there was such a hard turn off of it. I think if it had like kind of gone into gradual decline and just kind of, you know, petered out a bit, then maybe people wouldn't have missed it so much, but it just went away. And that was it. And all of a sudden people went, hey man, you know, why was that such a bad thing, that take on rock? And I don't know. I mean, I think that's more of an American thing than anything. I think in other countries, maybe they're a little more open-minded to kind of keeping all the genres open. We're kind of obsessed with what's cool and what we're supposed to be doing to be hip. And that's something that never in my life have I really truly understood. I've just tried to do what I like, because I don't think I've ever really been cool or hip. So thankfully it kind of worked out a bit for me that the style of music that I grew up digging came back. After that I went back to the Chicago area, and the bands that I had, we'd write our own tunes, and it would be anything, you know. We'd just like, sometimes it was kind of funkier stuff, and I think, you know, I don't necessarily dislike all the 90s bands. I think there were some great bands that came out of that genre, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. You know, certainly, you know, there's definitely some talent and some real substance there. Yeah, you look back on it, you go, well, it wasn't that bad. I don't know, everybody was still playing live, and nobody was using, you know, auto-tune to the point where it was a joke, and editing, and like madness to the point where your computer is making your album and not the band. So I don't know. I mean, I just try and look on, you know, what it really did was it gave me the opportunity to say, all right, I'm going to have to take a look at what I can control in terms of being a musician and making a living. Because obviously everybody had their gripes with it, but it was like, all right, well, there's no turning back. It's like forge onward and find a way through. And the resurgence was really an amazing thing when it came about. And for me to play with the heroes, and all the way up to nowadays working with David Coverdale and Whitesnake, is just, you know, that's a total honor for me.
What would you find? The city rots and the weeds take control.